Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to work on how entire populations actually change over time. So instead of talking about evidences and individual things that Darwin figured out, we're talking about whole population shifts. So what I'd like for y'all to do is either have your Google Doc open and start typing it in as I'm talking, or of course, I'll attach the PDF and you guys can fill in your notes later on, but I'd like you to have those. Okay, it should create a copy for each of you in Google Classroom. So let's start with the first one, gene pool. I want you to think of a pool, not like a swimming pool, but a pool as in a collection of something. Okay, so this is all the genes that are available in a single habitat. So if you had a fish tank in your room or a pond in your backyard, that would be a gene pool. Okay, a pretty small one, right? Whereas the human gene pool, since we can mate with anybody on the planet we wanted to, is actually very large. All right, so your gene pool is based on your habitat. This picture here is showing a gene pool of dogs. Okay, all right, the next one, genetic equilibrium. That's just when the genes in an ecosystem are pretty stable and balanced, relatively unchanging. Okay, they say that the human gene pool is in genetic equilibrium right now. We're not changing too much. I disagree with that. More and more people are coming into the United States or leaving the United States. The barriers of marrying and having children with someone that are not your own race are changing. So I think the human gene pool is changing as people's thoughts and beliefs actually change. Okay, now guys, the next three are kind of important, okay, and this is showing you how whole populations will shift one way or the other. All right, so stabilizing, I want you to think about stable. If I say someone in the hospital is stable, that means they're pretty much, average. They're not changing much. All right, so with selections though, stabilizing selection means you're favoring average individuals. Okay, so I want you to remember it's good to be average. Okay, so in this one here, the original population is shown by this dashed bell curve here, and the new population is shown by the skinnier middle graph here. Okay, so that means if you surveyed the whole population, more and more and more of them will be average. Okay, a good example of that for humans is birth weight. Okay, if you know how much you weighed, or you can ask your mom or dad how much you weighed, and I could survey all that, I guarantee you the majority of us will be between the 6 and 8 pound range. I think the average right now is in the United States is like 7 pounds, 10 ounces or something like that. Okay, were there some of you born smaller than that? Of course. Were there some of you born larger than that? Of course. But by and large, the majority of them would be right there in the middle, okay? Because too small is risky and too large is risky. That's how stabilizing selection works. Okay, so here's an example of those here with these ants. All right, if I'm the teeny tiny ant and somebody finds me, they're going to eat a bunch of us. If I'm this big old fat ant over here, I'm probably slower. I can't hide as well, so I'm going to get eaten. Okay, so these will be eaten. These will be eaten, and then over time, your graph will be skinnier in the middle. Okay, that's stabilizing selection. All right, the next one is directional. This is when your whole population shifts to the left or to the right. Okay, so as an example here, if our original curve is in the middle like this, obviously the anteater with the longest snout is going to be able to get more ants. Okay, so over time, there will be more population of organisms with a longer snout than the smaller snout. Will there be some with a smaller snout? Of course. There just won't be as many. Okay, that's directional. Think about the peppered moths that we did the other day. We went from light moths to dark moths, and then after we cleaned up the environment, back to light moths again. That's directional. Okay, if we took the average height of all of us and then we took the average height of everybody in the NBA, it would shift completely to the right. Okay, not that short people can't play ball, it's not what I'm saying, but generally speaking, especially if you are rebounding or things like that, it's better to be tall. Okay, all right, so here's an example of that. We've got some woodpeckers that are common in North Carolina. Small beak, medium beak, longer beak. The ones with the longer beaks can potentially get more food because they can dig deeper into a tree. Okay? All right, now, disruptive selection is kind of hard for kids to understand, okay? This is when you don't want to be average. It sucks to be average, okay? The light ones are favored, the dark ones are favored, the medium ones are eaten. The small ones are favored, the big ones are favored, the medium ones are eaten. Okay, so what happens with your graph, it ends up looking like an M. All right, so let's use this example over here. Okay, so if I am a light crab and I hang out on the light sand, okay, then I'm going to be camouflaged pretty well. So my population is going to go up. If I am a dark crab in dark sand, my population is going to go up, okay? But what if I'm a medium colored guy? I'm kind of screwed either way, because if I go hang out with my light cousins, I'm going to be darker than them and I'm going to be eaten. And if I go hang out with my darker cousins, I'm going to be lighter than them and I'm going to be eaten. Okay, so then your graph ends up doing this. Okay, so survive, die, survive. That's what disruptive selection is. Okay, all right, so here are all of those together. So here's your normal population. Okay, directional, see how it's shifted to the side. That one's pretty easy to spot. Stabilizing means the more and more of them are in the middle, and then the disruptive is easy to spot too because it looks like an M. Being average is not a good thing, okay? All right, and we're going to skip these because I'm going to let y'all practice those on your own. Okay, so let me talk a minute about, I'm going to cover this picture up, speciation. All right, speciation is when a new species is created because organisms are isolated. You guys know what isolate means, right? You're by yourself and they're isolated for so long that they cannot mate anymore. Okay, now keep in mind, this is not when humans are involved. Humans create new species all the time, and I'm going to show you some examples on the next screen. Okay, just like how we create new varieties of dogs all the time, but they're not new species. Okay, because all those dogs can still mate with other dogs. So speciation happens when organisms cannot reproduce anymore. So there are three kinds of reproductive isolation: behavioral, geographic, and temporal. And they're pretty easy. I'll show you those in a second. But let me give you two examples of when humans get involved, okay? This guy here is a liger, and I think you guys have heard of them before. So what a scientist did is they actually took the egg of a lion and the sperm of a tiger, or vice versa, I can't remember, and they created this organism here, a liger. So guys, I want you to look closely at that picture of that liger. That guy is feeding that thing milk. That means that is not a mature individual. Thing's still growing. Look how big it is. Okay, they are unnaturally huge. You can tell it has distinct characteristics of a lion and a tiger, but how you know that that organism was really not meant to be is sterile. Can't reproduce. They can be male or female, but there's no eggs, there's no sperm. So you can put a female liger with a male liger and think you're going to get more ligers, and it won't happen. Okay, that's a first telltale sign that a species was not meant to exist. Okay, same with, I think it's a donkey and a horse. It makes a mule. Mules are sterile. Okay, and then over here, they actually tried to mix a tiger and a house cat. I've not heard too much about those, but I have heard that they get really wild. And like this guy here owns a refuge for these ligers in Florida. You can Google it. And he takes them in. So there's one of them where he's standing on the top of like a lifeguard station that you might see at the beach. And that's how he feeds those things, like big sides of beef. So you should check that out. But this is not the speciation that we're talking about over the next 3 slides, okay? This is when humans are involved. All right, so the first one here is behavioral isolation. That means there's some behavior that keeps them from mating. So like in this silly example here, if the cardinal has one song and the blue jay has another song, they would not mate with one another. A behavior is keeping them from mating. Okay, and that is actually very, very common in the animal kingdom. Do I think it would make a very pretty purple bird? Probably, okay, but that doesn't happen. That's behavioral. All right, the next one is geographic, and I think this one's pretty easy to understand. Basically, there's some land or physical barrier that keeps them apart. So if you had, there's a very common example in the Grand Canyon. One side of the Grand Canyon, there's a gray squirrel, and the other side, there's a red squirrel, and they can't mate because they can't get to one another. Even if we put them together today, physically, they couldn't mate. Okay, or like on the Galapagos Islands, if one animal couldn't get to another animal, they could end up becoming very different. And that's a lot of things that they think happened when Pangea split. Okay. All right, and the last one is temporal. I want you to try to remember the T for timing. So they reproduce at different times, so therefore, obviously, the sperm and egg or pollen and ovule could never get together. So like this daffodil blooms in what, March, April, and of course the poinsettia blooms in November, December, so they wouldn't mate. Okay, T for timing. All right, so here's some examples here, and again, we'll do those later in essence of time here. Okay, convergent evolution, I want you to think of the word co. So two species are unrelated, but they become so similar that they can eventually mate. So here's species X, here's species Y. They come so similar over thousands of years that at this point in time here, they can mate, and then you end up with one species instead of two. Okay? All right, and then the opposite of that is divergent evolution. This is when the species become so different that they cannot mate any longer. So it's one species, but then at this point in time, they become so different that they become two different kinds. This is what they think happened with wolves and all of our modern dogs. Like a wolf and a dog don't mate anymore because they're so different. Okay, that's divergent. All right, adaptive radiation. This is just how one species like arrives. It's usually called the founding population, and then many species evolve out of that to fill different roles. So this is what they think happened with those finches we talked about on the first day of evolution. Like, see, here's the founder who ate seeds, and then over millions of years, they've adapted all these different beaks, and those don't mate with one another. Okay, that's the important part. All right, a couple more, guys. These are actually pretty easy. Gradualism just means evolution is slow and steady. Human evolution is gradual. Okay, the giraffe evolution is gradual. And it almost looks like, you know, a curvy branch here. All right, and then punctuated equilibrium. This is when you have long periods where there's no change, and then all of a sudden something drastic happens and it causes everything to change very, very quickly. So think about the dinosaurs, right, with the meteor shower that they think took them all out. Think of an ice age. Think of even a huge fire that could make things change rapidly. Okay, so this picture shows it well. See how there's no change, no change, no change, no change. And then something cataclysmic happens here, and then they had to change abruptly. Okay, that's punctuated equilibrium. All right, so here's a diagram of just the two of those things there. Okay, so this is gradually changing over time, which is what humans have done. Wolves, the whale, obviously, remember how you still don't believe me about that probably, and then punctuated, see how they look one way, and then they drastically change from one to another. Okay? All right, so guys, that's all I have for this lesson. If you would kind of do the Google form that goes along with it and make sure you fill out your notes so you'll have that. Maybe you can use it on a quiz or a test later on. Okay? Thank you. Email me if you have any questions.